So, climate change. Well, the governments of the world have been talking about tackling this particular problem for over 30 years through the United Nations Framework Convention process, the COP meetings that happen every year. And the governments of the world have been fully briefed on aspects of climate change through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change process, who've been putting out reports for 35 years or so. So, governments of the world, the policymakers of the world know all about the problem of climate change. They know what they need to do to fix it, and they've known that for decades. But in the last 35 years, we have made the problem twice the size it was back in the early 1990s. Half of all global emissions of greenhouse gases and half of all global emissions of greenhouse gases have been emitted in the last 35 years, since the early 1990s. So this spike of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere keeps on going up. So that's half of all emissions since 1750, since 1990. Global emissions just keep going up despite all the talk. Now, climate action, we're accelerating in the opposite direction. And those emissions from 1750, when James Watt and co started burning coal to power their first steam engines, some of those emissions are still around. They're still in the air in this room today. Carbon dioxide lives in the air for centuries, some of it for millennia. So the carbon dioxide that James Watt's steam engines emitted in the 1700s are with us right here, right now. What we're emitting now will still be around in 2100, 2500, the year 3000. We've already changed the climate away from the stable regime we've had for about the last 10,000 years. And that former climate is not coming back anytime soon, if ever. As the IPCC said in its last report, actions we take this decade will affect and impact life on Earth for thousands of years into the future. So the first IPCC report came out, we had about annual emissions of a bit over 20 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide. Now we're up to nearly 40 billion tonnes. It really is a sad story. So why are we seeing climate change? Well, greenhouse gases, of course, like carbon dioxide. These gases absorb the heat the Earth radiates and radiate a lot of it back down to the Earth's surface, warming it again. So it keeps the Earth warmer. Just like a blanket on your bed at night keeps you warmer. Having this blanket of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the air keeps the Earth's surface warmer. And if you put a thicker blanket over yourself in bed at night, you'll be toastier. You put a thicker blanket of greenhouse gases over the Earth's surface will be toastier. That's just how it works. And every kilo of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we add to the atmosphere, add to that blanket, adds to the warming. And because of the super long lifetime of carbon dioxide in the air, to stop global warming means we have to completely stop emitting this stuff. Not just turn down the tap a bit, we have to get to zero emissions. And there just isn't enough land to plant all the trees, etc., to absorb all of these emissions. And as you've just heard, you're not really doing that job at all by planting trees. We actually have to get to zero gross emissions. We have to stop emitting carbon dioxide. And that means stopping the burning of fossil fuels, which is the main source of the carbon dioxide emissions, and it's the main source of energy for the global economy. So this is not an easy thing to do. It's easy to say, but it's very hard to do, I know. So currently, I think 86% of global energy production comes from the burning of fossil fuels. Even in New Zealand, that statistic is 57% of our energy is from fossil fuels. It powers almost all of our transport, powers industry, you name it. Fossil fuels are used to produce fertiliser. You heard about the nitrogen story just before. Used to produce plastic, etc., etc., etc. The use of fossil fuels is just intertwined in so many ways with the global economy. So we can't just turn off the tap, eh? But My message is we had better try, we had better find a way. We've been running in the opposite direction for decades now, opening the tap wider and wider on these emissions. It's very hard to see how to turn that around, how to get down to zero emissions, but the sooner we start talking about it, the sooner we start thinking about it, talking about it, putting resources into it, surely the easier it's going to get. We just need to get started. And why bother, some people might say. Well, when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was set up, the goal was to take action to avoid dangerous human interference in the climate system. Dangerous human interference. By the time of the Paris COP meeting in 2015, that had been translated to keeping the warming to less than 2 degrees above pre-industrial. And so the Paris Agreement, which this country is a signatory to, says that the countries of the world will take action to stop global warming at well below 2 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures, and that we will pursue efforts to stop at 1.5 degrees. And developed countries like New Zealand will be leading the way on that push. So, 1.5 to 2 degrees of warming. If we can stop there, we can avoid that dangerous interference, supposedly. But as we know, extreme events are already on steroids at about 1.3 degrees of warming. Massive heat wave in Western Europe again this week. Massive floods and storms in New Zealand over the last few months and last few years. So, these extremes are becoming more and more intense as time goes on. Rising temperatures go with more moisture of the air, so there's more fuel to fall as rain when a storm happens. And when it's not raining, it's a warmer climate, so soils and plants dry out faster, and we get into drought conditions more easily. So you're getting bigger extremes at both ends of the rainfall scale. Combine that with more intense heat waves, and we're putting crop production, we're putting food security at risk, both here and around the world. We're virtually at 1.5 degrees of warming already. The single year, 2024, broke through that threshold. And we know that temperature rise has a straight line relationship with the total amount of emission of carbon dioxide, and it's easy to calculate. There'll be enough carbon dioxide in the air to guarantee 1.5 degrees of warming and beyond by 2030. That's 4 years away. Currently, 2024 stands as the warmest year on record in the instrumental period. It'll be one of the coldest years on record over the next few decades because everything's just warming up all the time. To stop at 2 degrees of warming, we need really heroic efforts from here. 10% or more reduction in emissions every year from here. Righto. With current global commitments to emissions reductions, we're heading for about 3 degrees of warming this century. In the current climate, ex-tropical cyclone Gabrielle delivered about 20% more rainfall over the country than would have happened, say, if it had occurred in the 1960s. Imagine if it delivered 50% more rain. That's the kind of thing you'd expect in a 3-degree warmer world. The recent floods in Wellington a few weeks ago saw extreme rainfall amounts of about 80 millimetres per hour. That would easily go to over 100 millimetres per hour in a 3-degree warmer world, and so on. These extremes will become enough to devastate our communities, our infrastructure, our food production, our economy. And by the way, it's estimated that the recent extremes, the climate change component of those, have already cost our economy about $1 billion. These escalating costs of climate-related disasters and damage are replicated around the globe. That's why when the last IPCC assessment came out, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said current policies are taking the world to a 2.8 degree temperature rise by 2100. That spells catastrophe. And warming above 2 degrees C brings a likelihood of the loss of the Amazon rainforest, the irreversible melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet and metres of sea level rise, the shutdown of the deep ocean circulation, the AMOC if you're into the acronyms, global redistribution of rainfall patterns, sea level rise rates. If the AMOC shut down, that would freeze Western Europe in the winters, while it turned up the thermostat in the Southern Hemisphere in New Zealand. Take all of those things, plus the continually pumped up extreme events that are happening around the world. This is likely enough to knock out the rule of law in some countries, to start wars over basic resources, potentially to turn our civilisation on its head. So yeah, let's tackle this problem. Why have we not so far? Well, as Cyndi Lauper sang in the mid-1980s, money changes everything. There's a huge amount of money and power tied up in the status quo, in the oil industry, in fossil fuels. The governments of the world are more concerned about increasing their GDP, growing their economies, ensuring fuel security than they are about stopping climate change and avoiding the end of civilisation. Oh well, I guess we'll get what we deserve, yeah? Now, look, if we can't tackle the problem because of all this money tied up in fossil fuels, at least we can invest in adaptation, right? We can make our communities more resilient, right? Ideally, yes, but we know that of government expenditure on disasters in the last 15 years in this country, 97% has been on clean-up and only 3% on preparedness. 3%. We're great at lining up the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff, but we're hopeless at putting the fence at the top of the cliff so far. And this is an area, again, where money changes everything. In this case, insurance money. Insurance companies are very sensitive to these climate-related risks, and they're already pulling out of insuring some communities against some hazards. Those no insurance zones will spread as insurance retreat sets in. Now, if you can't insure your home against coastal inundation or river flooding, whatever, then you can't sell it. Your home becomes worthless. People will respond to this. Ideally, we'll have a national plan for adaptation. We'll have a plan for managed retreat, etc. We'll have government funding to allow local government to take the action it needs to take. But in the absence of any government coordination and government intervention, we'll have unmanaged retreat. We'll have chaos. Home and business owners may be left to bear the costs themselves. We really urgently need to work out how to proceed and what the appropriate actions are in this space right now. So potentially catastrophic impacts, little preparation to deal with them. Sheesh. Yet, we have 100% of the power in this situation. We can work to protect ourselves. We're the ones emitting all the greenhouse gases. We can stop doing that. When we do, we know we will stop global warming. We can do this. Whether we have the political will or the wit to do it, that's the question. I certainly hope that we collectively find the gumption to get started for all our sakes and for the sake of all future generations. Thank you.